On his very first day, Jacob just wanted to blend in, but the school bully had other plans. In front of everyone, coffee was poured over his head and laughter filled the room. Phones recorded, ready to make him a viral joke. But what no one realized was that Jacob wasn't just another student. He was a Taekwondo champion. What happened next shocked the entire school. Before we dive in, make sure you hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The first day at a new school is supposed to be a fresh start. For Jacob Daniels, it was a chance to quietly blend in, to walk into the halls of Ridgewood High unnoticed, and maybe, just maybe, finally escape the chaos of his old schools. He wasn't looking for attention, for friends, or for trouble. He just wanted one thing: peace. With his backpack hanging loosely over one shoulder, Jacob kept his head down as he walked past the crowded lockers. Whispers followed him, the kind that always trail the new kid. Some students gave him curious looks, others barely noticed, but Jacob felt the weight of every glance. He had lived this moment too many times before. New city, new school, new crowd sizing him up like a stranger walking into their territory. Jacob wasn't weak, and he wasn't shy, but he was tired. Tired of always starting over, tired of always standing out when all he wanted was to disappear into the background. All he hoped for was to make it through the first day without being noticed. But Ridgewood High wasn't the kind of school that gave new kids an easy start. And unfortunately for Jacob, the school had a ruler, a self-proclaimed king who made sure no one forgot who held the crown. His name was Martin Pike. Martin was the kind of boy who walked into a room like it belonged to him. He didn't need to try, his presence demanded attention. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore confidence like armor. But beneath that confidence was something darker: cruelty. Martin's power didn't come from respect. It came from fear, from the way he humiliated anyone weaker, quieter, or different. That morning, Martin spotted Jacob across the cafeteria, alone, quiet, vulnerable, and to Martin, that meant one thing: an opportunity. With a sly grin, Martin snatched a cup of iced coffee from one of his friends. His crew trailed behind him, their laughter already bubbling in anticipation. The cafeteria, buzzing with chatter moments before, began to quiet as students noticed Martin's slow stride toward the new kid's table. Phones slipped out of pockets. Screens lit up. Everyone knew what was about to happen. Martin never let a new face go untested. Jacob had just unwrapped his sandwich when Martin's shadow loomed over him. "Welcome to Ridgewood," Martin sneered, his tone dripping with mockery. Before Jacob could even respond, Martin tilted the cup, and cold coffee poured down Jacob's head and shoulders, soaking his shirt, dripping onto his tray, splashing onto the floor. Laughter exploded. The cafeteria roared like a stadium. Students pointed, shouted, and leaned over tables to get a better view. Phones recorded every second, ready to turn Jacob into the newest viral punchline. But Jacob didn't react the way Martin expected. He didn't shout. He didn't swing. He didn't even raise his voice. Slowly, he set his sandwich back onto the tray, pushed his chair back, and stood. His fists tightened at his sides, his jaw clenched. But his eyes, steady and calm, never left Martin's. Then, without a single word, Jacob picked up his tray and walked away. To everyone watching, it looked like weakness. To Martin, it was proof of victory. But Jacob knew better. He wasn't running. He was waiting. Because Jacob Daniels wasn't just another transfer student, he was a Taekwondo champion, trained not just in combat, but in discipline, patience, and restraint. His master's voice echoed in his head. The strongest fighter isn't the one who starts the fight. Jacob, it's the one who knows exactly when to end it, and this fight was far from over. The rest of that day, whispers about Jacob spread through the hallways like wildfire. By the time the final bell rang, almost everyone had heard the story. The new kid froze. He just walked away while Martin dumped coffee all over him. Clips from the cafeteria were already making their way across group chats and social media. Jacob's silent walkaway was being replayed, laughed at, and mocked in slow motion. For most students, it was simple. Martin had won. Again, Martin basked in it. His laughter carried down the hallways long after the cafeteria incident. Every pat on his shoulder from his crew, every smirk from students passing by, only fed his ego. "See," he told his friends, "that's how you deal with new kids. Quick, easy, and funny. But Jacob?" He stayed silent. He wiped his clothes clean in the bathroom, ignored the pointing fingers, and walked through the halls as if nothing had happened. Some students thought he was too scared to fight back. Others thought maybe he just didn't care. But behind Jacob's calm eyes was something no one else could see control. Every insult, every laugh, every mocking glance, Jacob absorbed it like water sliding off stone. Because Jacob knew something the others didn't. His master's words echoed in his mind again and again. Patience is a warrior's greatest weapon. Let the storm come. Only then do you strike. Still, Jacob wasn't made of steel. When he sat alone at lunch the next day, the sting of humiliation replayed in his mind. Not the coffee, not the laughter, but the knowledge that his silence was being mistaken for weakness. He clenched his fists under the table. He hated that Martin thought he had won. That's when Ella, a quiet girl from his math class, walked over. She had been in the cafeteria during the coffee incident, but unlike everyone else, she hadn't laughed. She had only watched. Now she slid her tray onto Jacob's table and sat across from him. "Most people would have lost their temper," she said gently. "You didn't. That's different." Jacob looked up, surprised. No one had spoken to him since he arrived. "I didn't want to give him what he wanted," he said simply. Ella studied him for a moment before nodding. "Still, don't let him think you're scared. He'll keep pushing." Her words lingered long after she left. And Jacob knew she was right. Martin wasn't done, not by a long shot. Later that week, Martin struck again, this time in the gym. Jacob was lacing his sneakers when Martin swaggered in with his crew. "Hey, champ," Martin called out loudly, using the nickname mockingly. "Heard you got a new look. Coffee suits you." His friends roared with laughter. Jacob tightened his shoelaces, forcing himself to stay calm. But Martin wasn't finished. He shoved Jacob's gym bag across the floor, its contents spilling out. Sneakers, books, and clothes scattered. The laughter grew louder. Jacob stood slowly, his eyes locking with Martin's. The room grew still. Something in Jacob's gaze made even Martin hesitate. For half a second, it was no longer the gaze of a boy holding back humiliation. It was the gaze of a fighter waiting for the exact moment to strike. By the end of Jacob's first week at Ridgewood, the coffee incident had become a running joke. Wherever he went, whispers followed. Some students mimed pouring drinks when he passed by. Others snickered under their breath. For most, it was harmless fun. For Jacob, it was a test of endurance. He kept his head high, his steps steady. Every insult was a weight pressing against his patience. But behind his calm exterior, something was building, a quiet storm, waiting. Martin, of course, was the storm's spark. He wasn't satisfied with the coffee stunt. To him, dominance wasn't proven in one act. It had to be reinforced again and again. The more Jacob stayed silent, the more Martin wanted to break him. One afternoon, in front of the lockers, Martin made his next move. He swaggered up, smirking, and said loudly enough for the hallway to hear, "Hey, new kid, you forget how to talk, or are you just too busy practicing how to run away?" His friends cackled, high-fiving each other. Jacob didn't respond. He quietly closed his locker and turned to leave, but Martin wasn't done. He shoved Jacob hard against the metal doors, the clang echoing through the hallway. Phones were out in seconds. This wasn't just bullying anymore. It was a performance, and the whole school was the audience. Jacob's breath caught in his chest. He wanted to strike. Every muscle in his body screamed to react. But he remembered his master's lessons. Strength without control is weakness. Anger clouds judgment. Wait, the right moment will reveal itself. So he steadied his breathing, unclenched his fists, and walked away again. To the crowd, it looked like cowardice. To Martin, it was proof that Jacob was his personal punching bag. But in Jacob's heart, it was something else, a line being drawn. And he knew, if Martin crossed it again, silence would no longer be the answer. That night, Jacob sat in his room replaying the moment. His knuckles whitened as he pressed his palms together, his breathing slow and deliberate. He wasn't afraid of Martin. He never was. What weighed on him was restraint, the constant holding back, the fear that if he unleashed even once, he'd lose control. But the voice of his master whispered again, "True power is not in the strike. It is in knowing when the strike is needed." The next day, Martin gave him no choice. In the cafeteria, with the crowd gathered once more, Martin escalated further. He grabbed Jacob's lunch tray, lifted it high, and with a mocking laugh, dumped it onto the floor. Food splattered across the tiles, gasps rippled through the room, and all eyes turned toward Jacob. This time, Jacob didn't move away. He didn't lower his gaze. He didn't take a single step back. Instead, he slowly stood, eyes fixed on Martin, his posture calm but unshakable. The cafeteria fell silent, tension thick in the air. Even Martin's friends stopped laughing, sensing something was different this time, and in that silence, Jacob spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, steady, but carried the weight of a promise. "Don't touch me again." The cafeteria had never been this quiet. Forks hovered mid-air, phones pointed like spotlights, and even the laughter that usually echoed through the room had vanished. All eyes were locked on Jacob Daniels, the quiet new kid who, for the first time, had spoken directly to Martin Pike. "Don't touch me again." His words weren't loud, but they cut through the air sharper than a blade. For a brief second, Martin froze. Something about the way Jacob said it, calm, steady, unflinching, sent a ripple of unease through the room. But then, as quickly as it appeared, Martin's smirk returned. He couldn't back down now. "Not in front of everyone, oh yeah?" Martin sneered, stepping closer. "Or what? Are you going to walk away again, coffee boy?" His friends laughed, trying to drown out the tension that was creeping in. But Jacob didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply stood his ground, eyes locked on Martin. The silence was suffocating. Then Martin shoved him, hard. Jacob staggered back a step, but instead of falling, he regained his balance with the ease of someone who had trained for this moment 1,000 times. And that's when it happened. The storm Jacob had been holding back finally broke. In a flash, Martin's hand shot forward, aiming to grab Jacob's shirt. But Jacob moved quicker. His arm twisted around Martin's wrist in one fluid motion, locking it with a grip that made Martin's face contort in shock. Gasps erupted from the crowd as Martin, the untouchable bully, was suddenly the one caught. Before Martin could react, Jacob stepped to the side, applied pressure, and with a controlled twist, brought Martin crashing down to his knees. The sound of his fall echoed through the cafeteria. The crowd erupted, not with laughter this time, but with shouts of shock. Jacob didn't stop there. As Martin tried to yank his arm free, Jacob's movements were calm, precise. Textbook Taekwondo. He shifted his stance, delivered a sharp, controlled kick that knocked Martin backward, sending him sprawling onto the floor. Phones caught every angle, but no one dared laugh now. Martin scrambled, red-faced, trying to regain his footing. He lunged at Jacob with rage, but Jacob sidestepped effortlessly, sweeping his leg out with perfect timing. Martin hit the ground again, harder this time, his pride shattering with every fall. And yet, Jacob didn't go too far. Every strike, every movement was measured. He wasn't fighting to destroy Martin. He was fighting to control the situation. His master's lessons rang in his mind. A true fighter uses strength to protect, not to humiliate. Finally, with Martin on the ground, Jacob stood over him, calm and composed. His breathing steady, his fists unclenched. He had won, but not through anger. Through discipline. The cafeteria sat in stunned silence. No one cheered, no one mocked. They were witnessing something they had never seen before. True strength. Jacob looked down at Martin, who clutched his wrist in pain. And with the same steady tone as before, Jacob said, only 4 words. This ends right now. The cafeteria had emptied faster than anyone could process. Phones were still recording, snippets of the confrontation already making their way across social media. Students crowded the hallways, replaying the moment in their minds, whispering about the calm new kid who had just toppled the school's king. Martin Pike sat against a row of lockers, his pride shattered and his wrists throbbing. For the first time in years, he wasn't the center of power. He looked around, hoping for support from his friends, but their expressions were different now, uneasy, uncertain. Even they could see that Martin had lost control. Jacob, meanwhile, moved quietly through the crowd. He didn't raise his fists, didn't gloat, didn't speak. His presence alone shifted the energy of the hallway. People parted instinctively, sensing that he carried a new kind of authority, one earned, not demanded. Rowan, who had been watching from a distance the entire time, felt something change inside him. The same boy who had been a shadow in the hallways, who had endured Martin's constant bullying, now radiated confidence, discipline, and an almost unshakable calm. For the first time, Rowan dared to breathe freely. You didn't have to fight like that," Rowan whispered as Jacob walked past him. Jacob gave him the smallest nod, as if to say, "Sometimes strength is shown by restraint, not aggression." Rowan felt a surge of admiration and relief. This wasn't just a victory over Martin, it was a lesson, a promise that courage didn't need to look loud or angry to be real. By the next morning, the story had traveled across the school faster than anyone could count. Every classroom buzzed with whispers, every group chat lit up with video clips. Students who had feared Martin before now avoided him, and those who had laughed at Jacob before now whispered his name with respect. Even the teachers and staff couldn't ignore the shift. Principal Harrison called both boys into his office, his expression serious. "Jacob," he said, "your discipline is impressive, but fighting in school is not acceptable. You will face a suspension. Martin, you will also face consequences. But let this be a lesson. Strength is measured by control, not intimidation." Jacob nodded calmly. He accepted the consequences without a word. Martin, red-faced and humiliated, clenched his fists silently. Outside the office, Rowan fell into step beside Jacob. "You didn't just beat him, you ended him," Rowan said, voice shaking. Jacob glanced at him, a faint smile forming. "No, I didn't end him. I just showed him who he really is." The real power of the day wasn't in the bruises or broken wrist. It was in the example Jacob set. Strength was about patience, discipline, the courage to act only when the moment demanded it, and as the school slowly returned to routine, the lesson lingered. Students carried it in the whispers they shared. Martin Pike had been dethroned, but more importantly, the balance of Ridgewood High had shifted forever. Even those who had once laughed at Jacob now felt the weight of his quiet presence. The story wasn't about violence, it was about courage, control, and the unwavering strength of a boy who refused to be broken. And somewhere in the crowd, Rowan realized something profound. Sometimes heroes don't announce themselves with words. By the end of the week, the ripple effect of that single confrontation had transformed Ridgewood High. Hallways once ruled by fear now carried whispers of respect. Students who had lived under Martin's shadow now walked a little taller, inspired by the quiet strength they had witnessed. Jacob moved through the halls as if nothing had happened. His clothes were clean, his backpack slung casually over one shoulder. No one dared disturb him, not because he threatened them, but because he had shown what real power looked like, composed, deliberate and fearless, without a trace of arrogance. Martin Pike, on the other hand, struggled to regain his footing. He had been the self-appointed ruler of the school, the one who believed fear equaled control. But after facing Jacob, that illusion shattered. His crew no longer laughed at his jokes. His friends avoided eye contact, unsure how to support a boy who had been humbled so publicly. In the cafeteria, Rowan sat quietly, reflecting on the events of the past few days. He had watched Jacob transform from the quiet new kid into someone unstoppable, not because of anger, but because of patience and discipline. Rowan whispered almost to himself, "You didn't just win. You changed everything." Jacob gave him the faintest nod. "I didn't want to fight," he said softly, "but some things, they won't wait forever." And that was the truth. Strength wasn't about proving dominance in the moment. It was about knowing when to act and how to act to make a lasting impact. The lesson reached far beyond the school walls. Phones and social media had captured it all, making Jacob's story an example of courage that resonated with anyone who had ever been bullied, humiliated, or underestimated. Even teachers began noticing the shift. Students who had been timid or fearful now walked with purpose, Conversations changed. Laughter returned, but this time it wasn't fueled by cruelty, it was fueled by confidence. The power dynamic had altered, not through anger or violence, but through unwavering self-control. Martin never fully recovered his old image. He learned, the hard way, that intimidation could only take you so far. He would think twice before underestimating someone again, and perhaps in some small way, he learned the value of respect, though it was taught to him in the harshest way possible. As the sun set on Ridgewood High, the school felt lighter, brighter, freer. Jacob walked home with Rowan by his side, their steps easy, their conversation quiet. The world around them had shifted because one boy refused to be broken, because one boy showed that patience, control, and courage could speak louder than fear. And, for every student watching, there was a message. You don't need to be the loudest, the strongest, or the toughest to make a difference. Sometimes it's the calm in the storm, the quiet refusal to bend, and the unwavering confidence in yourself that changes everything. Jacob glanced at Rowan, his expression steady, and said simply, "Remember this moment, not because of me, but because of what you can do when no one's watching." Rowan smiled, understanding fully, and somewhere in the crowd, phones captured that subtle nod, the final piece of the story that reminded everyone who watched it. Strength isn't about fighting every battle. It's about winning the ones that truly matter. Remember, true strength isn't shown in anger or violence. It's shown in patience, control, and the courage to stand tall when no one's watching. If you were inspired by Jacob's story, hit that subscribe button and never miss a story that proves anyone can rise above fear.